They stole my forest to build 96 houses. I let them finish construction, then used 50 years of paid taxes to win the $4.2 million land and give every home back. The sublime theft and the genesis of the master plan. The day I drove up to the land, I wasn't merely seeking a destination. I was seeking an embrace, a return to the only place that felt truly untouched by the chaos of my life. The 47 acres of pristine Colorado forest, nestled against the foothills, had always represented the antithesis of my professional existence. My world, as a structural engineer, was ruled by the rigid, unforgiving dimensions of concrete, steel, and precise calculations. The land, however, was sublime chaos, the perfect, unmeasured legacy of my grandfather, William Flint. He left it to me with one single, powerful instruction, not a command, but a plea whispered across generations, a small, faded note tucked into the fold of the original 1971 deed. Don't let the bastards take what's yours. That phrase, heavy with the weight of his own silent struggles and his hard-earned wisdom, had become the silent, unbreakable mantra of my life. I turned off the old access road, a familiar rutted path that always felt like shedding one skin to enter another. But this time, the transition was not spiritual. It was violently interrupted. Where the dense canopy of ponderosa pines should have immediately engulfed the road, there was a shocking, surgical void. The entire forest, the very air that used to smell of damp earth and pine needles, was gone. Wiped clean. The silence that followed the realization was deafening. In its place was a relentless, sprawling sea of 96 identical Mediterranean-style stucco houses. It was an aggressive, jarring visual assault. Paved roads, freshly poured sidewalks, streetlights that had no business being in a wilderness, and perfectly manicured lawns replaced the wild, untouched beauty. A ridiculous, expensive carved stone sign, utterly out of place and reeking of corporate pretension, announced the theft with mocking grandeur, Ridgeline Heights, a Whitmore luxury community. I pulled over immediately, my body going cold with a visceral sense of violation. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to breathe. I checked my GPS 4 times, then checked the county plat map on my phone, desperately praying for a software glitch, a misplaced comma in the digital file. The coordinates were chillingly exact. This was my land. The loss was not just financial, though the theft was worth well over $4.2 million. It was an amputation of history, a severing of a lifeline to my past. I felt a sudden, profound loneliness. I had my excuses for the 3-year absence, the crushing debt from a tough divorce, the relentless hours required of a structural engineer trying to put 2 kids through college, but I had never, not once, missed the tax payment. $6,400 annually, paid online, on time, every single April. I kept every electronic receipt. That tax payment was my anchor to the land, the proof that even when my life was spiraling, this one thing was secure. Before I could even find the words for my rage, the orchestrator of the theft arrived. Out stepped Cassandra Whitmore, the HOA president, from a pristine white Range Rover. She was clad in expensive white linen and jewelry, including a Rolex that glittered like a tiny, arrogant sun, an accessory that seemed to mock the concept of honest labor. She saw my work boots, my calloused hands, and my dusty truck, and in a fraction of a second, categorized me as utterly beneath her. She addressed me, her voice dripping with the calculated condescension of the truly privileged, immediately labeling me a deadbeat squatter, someone who clearly didn't belong in her new world. She didn't just dismiss my claim, she attempted to legally justify her crime. She claimed her title company had run a forensic search and determined the land was legally abandoned under Colorado's antiquated adverse possession statute. Her words were laced with threats disguised as facts. All 96 houses are pre-sold. We've collected $16 million in non-refundable deposits. This is a done deal, Mr. Flint. You are too late. She was daring me to fight a mountain of wealth and corporate interest. I managed to fumble for my phone, desperately trying to show her the photos of my paid taxes. Her expression didn't crack. Her smile merely hardened, transforming into a patronizing smirk that was worse than anger. She handed me a lawyer's card and offered the final, most devastating insult. a paltry $15,000 settlement, a literal nuisance fee, if I would sign a quit-claim deed and vanish. $15,000 for $4.2 million in land. It was an act of pure, unadulterated contempt. A moment that galvanized the knot of cold resolve in my gut. She even took the time to photograph my license plate, just in case I decided to become a nuisance, adding, "People like you don't win against people like us." A dismissive phrase I would hear repeatedly until I finally broke its power. I drove home that day, my body rigid, consumed by a need for justice that entirely eclipsed the fear of financial ruin. I spread my grandfather's documents across my kitchen table, every piece of paper an artifact of his honesty. The original 1971 deed, the survey maps, and all 50 years of meticulously kept tax receipts. The note, "Don't let the bastards take what's yours," now felt like a direct, thundering order, an ancestral mandate I was bound to fulfill. I sought out Lydia Chen, a formidable litigation attorney known for her tenacity and her impressive victories against major corporate interests. Her office was not ostentatious, but it smelled of old leather and the quiet, heavy confidence of deep, intellectual power. She listened for nearly an hour, without interrupting, as I recounted the entire saga, detailing Cassandra's arrogance and their illegal claims. The moment I presented the stack of tax receipts, her assessing eyes, which had been steady and calm, flickered with genuine recognition. She confirmed the obvious. Since the property taxes were continuously paid, the Whitmore's claim of adverse possession was legally dead on arrival. The core of their defense was already neutralized. However, the legal situation was far from simple. My immediate, emotionally charged instinct was to file for an injunction, to halt construction immediately and preserve what little natural land was left. Lydia gently, but firmly, shook her head. She laid out the cold, brutal legal reality, the consequence of moving too quickly. If you stop construction now, the developers, having committed some but not all of the fraud, will immediately declare bankruptcy. Your land will be tied up for years with 96 innocent families suing everyone, including you, for their deposits. It becomes a legal swamp. She looked at me, her expression grave, impressing upon me the gravity of the choice. Then came the calculated, terrifying gamble that defined the entire subsequent year: you must let them finish building. The logic was clinical and ruthless. If the Whitmores completed the construction, poured the foundations, installed the plumbing, and finalized the landscaping, if they completed the sale of the homes, they would have committed textbook fraud on an undeniable scale. They would be selling homes built entirely on land they knew they did not own. At that pivotal moment, the entire subdivision, all 96 fully built, multi-$100,000 homes, would legally belong to me, standing as they did on my clear-titled land. This strategy completely reversed the dynamic, shifting the burden of chaos, debt, and potential criminal exposure entirely onto the developers. I paid her sizable retainer, committing to the most terrifying, high-stakes fight of my life. I had to risk everything to win everything. The bureaucratic war, and the emotional toll. The decision to allow the theft to continue was the single most difficult choice I have ever made, a constant, gnawing compromise between my immediate rage and Lydia Chen's cold, impeccable legal strategy. From that moment forward, I was no longer just Dakota Flint, structural engineer. I was an operative in a covert war fought entirely on my own land. My new life became a rigid routine of surveillance. I drove past Ridgeline Heights twice a week, every single week, parking discreetly on the public easement just across the county line. I was meticulous. I carried a professional DSLR camera and kept my phone's GPS logging constantly active. I took time-stamped photos of every construction phase: the huge trenches for the utility lines, the rapid framing of the walls, the installation of the specialized roofs. Every nail hammered, every brick laid, was another piece of irrefutable evidence confirming the Whitmores' deep, criminal commitment to their fraud. Lydia's rule was absolute, a mantra of calculated patience: document everything, and never engage. In property litigation, surprise is worth more than gold. I felt like a ghost, silently recording the instruments of my own destruction, knowing that every addition to the property was not a loss, but an accrual of damages I would eventually claim. The sheer audacity of the construction was staggering. They worked 7 days a week, pushing boundaries everywhere. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust, wet concrete, and the constant, rhythmic pounding of hammers, a symphony of contempt. I recorded the license plates of every contractor and subcontractor, cross-referencing them later to confirm their knowledge of the project's ownership lineage. The scope of their operation was dizzying, yet every single step they took was a step deeper into the legal trap Lydia had set. I was literally watching them build my multimillion-dollar judgment. Inevitably, Cassandra Whitmore spotted me. Her initial corporate contempt quickly metastasized into aggressive, personal intimidation. She couldn't understand why I hadn't taken the paltry $15,000. She doubled down on harassment, treating the local police like her private security firm. She filed multiple, relentless false police reports claiming harassment, stalking, and even, ridiculously, loitering. I found myself routinely dealing with Deputy Torres, a young officer clearly uncomfortable about being dragged into the affairs of his department's major campaign donor. He would arrive, take a statement with a weary sigh, and then, off record, politely warn me that any further complaints could force his hand. It was clear proof of systemic corruption. The law, for the wealthy, was a tool of harassment and control, readily wielded against those without political influence. The bureaucratic assault intensified. Next came a false report filed with the county code enforcement about illegal dumping and environmental violations on my unoccupied property. Rick Polson, the code enforcement officer assigned to the case, was another one of those good, worn-down men caught in the middle. He showed up, found my land pristine, exactly as I had left it, but the report still had to be filed. Off the record, he gave me crucial information. Mr. Flint, I've inspected 6 Whitmore projects in the last 4 years. Every single one had harassment or dumping complaints filed against neighboring landowners right before or during construction. This is not random. It's a systematic pattern of intimidation designed to frustrate and exhaust opponents. The developers were not just thieves. They were organized criminals, using every institutional lever available to them. But the hardest, most excruciating part of the strategy was the profound emotional toll it exacted. I was forced to continue watching the development, and by November, just a few months into the operation, the first families were moving into their finished homes. This was the moment I questioned everything. I watched U-Hauls pull in, full of hope and furniture. I saw excited children riding their new scooters on my illegally paved streets, and young couples planting small saplings, symbols of permanence and future, in the front yards. I felt physically ill. The sight of a young family carrying a crib into House 43, their faces full of hopeful exhaustion, was heartbreaking. These were not the villains. These were ordinary, hard-working teachers, nurses, and small business owners who had poured every penny of their life savings into a fraudulent contract. They were innocent pawns caught in a devastating financial snare. My moral dilemma was immense. My eventual legal victory meant their displacement, perhaps their ruin. I wrestled with this burden constantly, often calling Lydia at 10 p.m., begging for reassurance. Lydia reminded me that by winning, I wouldn't be taking their homes. I would be freeing them from the fraudulent contracts they were currently bound by. The goal, she insisted, was not revenge, but justice for all. To secure the title and then, only then, protect the innocent homeowners. But watching their hope bloom on stolen ground, that was the agonizing, daily price of strategy. When the legal and bureaucratic intimidation failed to make me budge, Cassandra resorted to the lowest, most toxic form of attack, character assassination. Days before our official preliminary court date, I received a frantic call from my daughter, Tyler, who was sobbing uncontrollably. Cassandra had unleashed a viral campaign on the local Community Watch Facebook group. It wasn't about the land anymore. It was personal destruction. She labeled me a stalker and a local predator who was taking photos of children and making residents feel unsafe. The post included a zoomed-in, grainy photo of me by my truck. The campaign went viral within hours, generating hundreds of shares and a torrent of vicious, hateful comments and direct threats against me and my family. Visual graphic of a viral social media post with extreme, blurred comments. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. My daughter was traumatized, convinced I was going to jail. My son was harassed by people at his own service industry job. My boss, a good man who had hired me 14 years ago, regretfully had to put me on extended, unpaid leave, citing the sensitivity of our school district contracts and the overwhelming optics. I was financially strangled and socially exiled. I watched Jenny from accounting, a woman who always brought cookies at Christmas, literally cross the parking lot to avoid me. Cassandra's goal was simple, yet devastating. Make me look so toxic, so dangerous, that even if I won the legal case, my reputation would be ruined, my life unlivable, and the settlement worthless. I was fighting not just for land, but for my reputation, my sanity, and my family's peace of mind. The RICO gambit, the smoking gun, and the courtroom climax. Lydia Chen, however, was not only unfazed by the toxic social media assault and the crushing financial burden placed upon me, she was absolutely energized. She saw the viral smears, the fraudulent police reports, and the endless stream of bureaucratic warfare not as setbacks, but as the clearest possible evidence of the enemy's panic and malice. They were, in effect, desperately proving our case for us, confirming the criminal intent, the systematic nature of the operation, and the utter desperation to stop me before the truth came out. The simple property dispute had long since burned off into something far more insidious, a complex, white-collar criminal pattern. Lydia was ready to deploy the most devastating weapon in her entire legal arsenal, the RICO Act. She explained the acronym, breaking down the complex legal jargon into simple, powerful terms. RICO stands for the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, a law designed to dismantle organized crime. She told me, Dakota, this wasn't just a bad land deal. This was a continuous pattern of fraud, utilizing multiple corporate entities and coordinated acts of theft and intimidation. That is the very definition of racketeering. Her deep-dive investigation into the corporate structure confirmed her suspicions. The primary orchestrator was not just Cassandra, who was merely the public face of the operation, but her husband, Preston Whitmore. He was the true financial puppet master, operating through a dense network of shell companies, Delaware LLCs, and separate financing firms, with a meticulously concealed history of this exact type of fraud in other states. Lydia immediately filed an amended complaint, adding the RICO charges. This was a game-changer. It instantly elevated the entire case from a standard, messy civil dispute to a serious federal matter, exposing the Whitmores to potential federal prison time and massive treble damages, a ruling that would multiply the final damage amount by 3. Their corporate empire was now truly at stake, not just a single, fraudulent subdivision. The corporate panic became acute, moving beyond mere harassment into coordinated criminal acts. They hired a private investigator, PI, to relentlessly harass my son, Tyler, at his service industry job, trying to get him fired through false complaints to his manager about his reliability and demeanor. Simultaneously, they filed an anonymous, yet highly detailed, report with the IRS, triggering an immediate, invasive audit of my taxes. They were using every instrument of the government, the police, the IRS, the media, against me, attempting to bury me in paperwork, fear, and debt. Lydia kept repeating the same mantra of reassurance. This is the sound of victory. They are desperate, and desperate people always make the fatal, irreversible mistake. Their desperation reached a terrifying, personal peak. One quiet afternoon, I returned home to find my garage door slightly ajar. Nothing appeared to be missing, no electronics, no valuables. But the invasion was far more targeted. On my kitchen table was a single sheet of paper, cleanly printed in thick, black block letters, "Drop it or lose everything." This was no longer civil litigation. This was brazen, criminal intimidation and a death threat to my fight. The air in my own home felt contaminated. My sanctuary was violated. However, their final act of malice was precisely their ultimate downfall. They hired a PI who was sloppy. My elderly neighbor, Carol, a retired librarian who tended her rose bushes and missed absolutely nothing, saw the suspicious black sedan and noted the license plate. She walked over to me, handed me a small, handwritten note, and said simply, "I wrote down the license plate, dear. The black sedan. It belongs to Thomas Brennan, a local private investigator. We had them dead to rights on felony breaking and entering and intimidation. The criminals who thought they were above the law had been documented and tracked by a careful librarian and a single, critical piece of evidence. Just as we finalized the preparations for the full trial, Lydia received the most powerful gift of all. A whistleblower, a former business partner of Preston's whom he had ruthlessly betrayed and financially destroyed years earlier, came forward. Revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold, and this person was ready to deliver it. This individual handed Lydia the ultimate weapon, the smoking gun email. In the federal courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. The silence was heavy, charged with anticipation. The moment Judge Ramirez denied their final motion to dismiss, Lydia knew the stage was set. She didn't ask, she demanded. She presented Exhibit A, the internal email from Preston to Cassandra. It was immediately blown up on a screen for the entire courtroom. The jury, the clerks, the judge, and the terrified Whitmores, to see. The text, in Preston Whitmore's own words, confirmed that he knew the adverse possession claim wouldn't hold up because the taxes were paid, but advised, "We can create enough chaos and confusion that Flint either settles cheap or gets buried entirely in litigation costs." Preston Whitmore's face drained of all color as he saw his own malice staring back at him. This was not just fraud. This was an explicit, premeditated conspiracy to steal land and destroy a man's life. The judge was visibly appalled, slamming her gavel down as she denied any further motions and issued a damning order against the defendants. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The rich and powerful were now exposed, and the truth, finally, had its day in court. The final judgment, the moral victory, and the true legacy. The momentum against the Whitmores was now a crushing, inescapable force. With the smoking gun email presented, the RICO charges pending, and the evidence of the fraudulent tax reports and the Pi's criminal activities laid bare, their legal position had completely disintegrated. They were no longer the powerful developers. They were criminals awaiting sentencing. But the final, satisfying blow came not from our side, but from within their compromised network. The representative from Rocky Mountain Title, the very company that had supposedly guaranteed the sales and provided clear title to the 96 homes, cracked under the immense pressure of the federal investigation. Under the protection of limited immunity, he admitted to taking a $45,000 bribe from Preston Whitmore to rubber-stamp the title, consciously ignoring the clear public record of my paid property taxes. The fraud was now fully documented, traceable from the initial deceit to the final transfer. The title company's betrayal was the final piece of evidence, confirming that the entire subdivision was built on a foundation of systemic, coordinated corruption. The final trial day felt less like a contest and more like a condemnation. The courtroom was packed, not just with lawyers and reporters, but with the 96 terrified homeowners, their faces etched with anxiety and a fragile, desperate hope. Lydia Chen, calm and resolute, systematically destroyed Preston Whitmore on the stand, using his own damning email against him until he was stammering, defeated, and exposed as a perjurer. Cassandra, facing overwhelming evidence and the threat of criminal indictment, invoked her Fifth Amendment right, refusing to testify, the ultimate, silent admission of guilt. The wait for the verdict was agonizing for everyone involved. Then, Judge Ramirez returned. Her ruling was not just a legal decision. It was a scathing denunciation of corporate greed. She found the defendants guilty of a calculated, systematic scheme to defraud the court and the public. The judgment was comprehensive and total victory. I was awarded full title to the 47 acres, the 96 homes, and over $4.2 million in damages, along with all legal fees. The Whitmore's corporate structure was dismantled. Preston faced multiple federal fraud charges. Cassandra's empire was liquidated. The money and power that they had used to intimidate and lie had finally, violently, turned against them. Justice, slow, expensive, and brutal, had finally arrived. But the most crucial part of the battle remained. The legal victory was mine, but the moral dilemma of the 96 innocent families was still unresolved. The homeowners were facing immediate eviction from houses they had poured their life savings into. This was the moment where my grandfather's true legacy would either be honored or betrayed. I knew then that winning the title was not the end. It was the means to achieve the moral goal. I called a town hall meeting at the local community center. The atmosphere was thick with tension, fear, and hostility. The homeowners were prepared for a fight, ready to plead, or perhaps even sue. I walked onto the small stage, took the microphone, and looked out at the faces of the people who had suffered alongside me. I spoke clearly, ensuring every word cut through the fear. I told them I would not punish them for the developers' crimes. I announced the creation of the Ridgeline Heights Community Trust. I was officially transferring ownership of all 96 homes, free and clear, to the trust. The families would keep their homes, paying only the original price to the trust, with zero interest on any remaining mortgage balance. Any funds generated by the trust would be immediately reinvested back into the community, covering maintenance and future expenses. The relief that swept through the room was palpable. It was a physical wave that broke the tension. People cheered, cried, and embraced. This decision ensured that every family who had been victimized by the Whitmores could finally achieve their dream, free from debt and fraud. This was the ultimate fulfillment of my grandfather's legacy. Land is about community and integrity, not revenge or profit. I kept a small, 5-acre plot of the original land, built a simple cabin among the recovering pines, and launched the William Flint Memorial Scholarship to support local students pursuing careers in sustainable engineering and forestry. My fight proved that no matter how much money the powerful have, no matter how compromised the system becomes, they can always be beaten by courage, patience, ethical maneuvering, and the unassailable power of cold, hard receipts. Pacing, visual cues, and deep emotional reflection. The moment Judge Ramirez struck her gavel, the sound of finality echoing off the oak paneling, was not a moment of sudden joy, but one of profound, exhausting relief. It was the sound of a siege finally lifting. The battle had been won, the title secured, and the corporate criminals indicted. But the true work, the work of reconciling the destruction and honoring the legacy, was just beginning. As the cameras flashed and reporters surged forward, I found myself looking past the chaos, past the defeated faces of the Whitmores, and toward the back of the courtroom where the 96 homeowners sat today. Their fear was still palpable. They had witnessed a legal massacre, and now they awaited their own fate. Lydia Chen, the young mother from House 67 who had planted the maple tree, caught my eye. Her question was silent, but crystal clear. What happens to us? Lydia Chen, ever the professional shield, guided me through the crowd. We secured the title, Dakota, she whispered. The legal objective is complete. Now comes the moral one. The realization hit me fully. The victory was comprehensive, but it was also a burden. I owned 96 houses filled with innocent people who now legally stood on my stolen land. My grandfather's note, "Don't let the bastards take what's yours," was a mandate for integrity, not for revenge against the innocent. Over the next few days, the reality of the win sank in. The sheer scope of the Whitmore's fraud, the documented bribes, the malicious social media campaign, the criminal break-in, confirmed that they had intended to not just steal the land, but to destroy my life and silence my family. The $4.2 million in damages felt less like a payout and more like compensation for the year of relentless psychological warfare. I spent hours poring over the final plans for the Ridgeline Heights Community Trust. This wasn't a tax loophole or a temporary measure. It was the foundation of the true legacy. I decided that every penny of the equity the homeowners had paid, every monthly payment they had faithfully made, would be honored. The trust would ensure they received clear, stable ownership, free from the shadow of the Whitmore's fraud. This decision was costly. I walked away from potentially selling the entire property for hundreds of millions, but it was the only ethical path forward. The financial details were immense. Lydia and her team worked tirelessly to transfer the properties from my name directly into the non-profit trust, ensuring that the former victims of fraud became the secure owners of their homes. This required delicate negotiation with the mortgage lenders, showing them the clear court ruling that severed the bank's ties to the Whitmore's fraudulent company. It was complex, exhausting legal architecture, all built to protect the innocent from the fallout of the guilty. The process of formally announcing the trust was crucial. We chose the local community center for the town hall meeting. I insisted that no press be allowed inside. This was not for public consumption, but for private healing and resolution. The atmosphere in that room was thick with fear. Fear of displacement, fear of losing their investment, fear of the unknown. They looked at me, the predator they had read about online, the man who held the keys to their futures. I walked onto the stage alone, without Lydia, without security. I spoke simply, without notes, addressing Sarah Chen and the others directly. I told them I understood their fear. I told them I understood the difference between the criminal and the victim. I announced the creation of the trust and the immediate transfer of their homes. I explained the zero-interest provision, that they would only pay the trust the remaining balance on the original, fraudulent price, eliminating all predatory interest and hidden fees imposed by the Whitmore's financing arm. The moment the announcement sunk in, the room exploded. It wasn't a sudden roar, but a wave of profound, emotional release. People began to cry, some hugging their partners, others rushing forward not to argue, but to embrace me. Sarah Chen, whose tears were the first I saw, looked at me, not with fear, but with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She repeated the phrase I had said so many months earlier, "We are finally free." This moment, that collective sigh of relief, that burst of unexpected hope, was the true victory. It confirmed that the purpose of the fight was never about money. It was about proving that integrity and community can triumph over greed and malice. The legacy I was meant to protect was not the land itself, but the values my grandfather had instilled in me. The final conclusion, the lasting legacy, and the call to action. The collective sigh of relief in that community center. The tears of those homeowners finally realizing they were safe. That moment was the single most valuable asset I gained from that entire fight. It was a currency far richer than the $4.2 million in damages or the value of the 96 homes I secured. It was the moment I understood that the true legacy I was fighting to protect wasn't just the land. It was the moral code my grandfather had left behind. After the town hall meeting dissolved into hugs and relieved confusion, I met with Lydia Chen one last time. We finalized the transfer of the properties to the Ridgeline Heights Community Trust. It was a complex legal maneuver, designed to be completely resilient against any future legal challenges from the remnants of the Whitmore empire. Every detail, from the zero-interest payment structure to the reinvestment of community funds, was meticulously planned to ensure that the victims of fraud became the secure, debt-free owners of their homes. This required severing ties with the fraudulent lending institutions and working directly with the honest title companies we could still trust. It was an exhaustive, final piece of legal architecture, built purely on integrity. The legal victory was absolute. Preston Whitmore's multi-state empire crumbled. He faced 6 federal indictments for fraud and racketeering. Cassandra, stripped of her corporate immunity and her Rolex, faced criminal charges and the complete liquidation of her assets. They learned, in the most devastating way possible, that wealth and arrogance are no shield against the truth when you have cold, hard receipts and a lawyer like Lydia Chen. I kept only 5 acres of the original 47. I hired a small, local crew and built a simple, sturdy cabin among the old, recovering pines. A place where I could finally feel the earth beneath my feet again, just as my grandfather had. This small, quiet place became my sanctuary, the physical manifestation of my hard-won peace. But the most important action I took was establishing the William Flint Memorial Scholarship. Funded by the Final Damage Award from the Whitmores, this scholarship was dedicated to supporting local students pursuing careers in sustainable engineering and forestry. It was a symbolic reversal. The money that was intended to destroy my future was now dedicated to building the future of the community that the Whitmores had tried to ruin. The fight was over, but the lessons endured. I learned that intimidation is the preferred tool of the guilty. The false police reports, the anonymous IRS audit, the vicious social media smear campaign, all of it was designed to force a cheap settlement by destroying my livelihood and my reputation. They tried to make me so toxic that I would lose the will to fight. But the truth is, every single act of harassment they committed only solidified the malice required to prove the RICO charges. Their desperation was their greatest mistake. I also learned the profound importance of documentation. The hundreds of time-stamped photos, the perfectly preserved tax receipts, the notes from my observant neighbor Carol. These weren't just evidence. They were proof of patience. When the powerful move quickly and sloppily, the quiet diligence of the prepared individual becomes the most powerful weapon. Lydia Chen didn't win the case with flashy courtroom theatrics. She won it with my grandfather's meticulous paperwork. The moral victory was the only one that truly mattered. By choosing to protect the 96 families instead of selling the newly acquired land for pure profit, I honored the legacy William Flint intended. He hadn't bought that land in 1971 to get rich. He bought it to be secure, to be free, and to be part of something real. The Ridgeline Heights Community Trust ensured that his fight created a community built on security, not on fraud. Now, years later, the dust has settled. The subdivision is no longer defined by the fraud that birthed it, but by the integrity that saved it. I sit on my small porch, watching the sun set over the remaining pines, feeling a quiet, enduring sense of peace. The bastards tried to take what was mine, but because of a single faded note, some paid tax receipts, and the brilliance of a good lawyer, I didn't just keep the land. I reclaimed my dignity and secured the future of nearly 100 families. Final call to action and outro. Pacing slows dramatically. If you are facing a massive corporation, if you are fighting powerful people who think they are above the law, remember this story. Remember the power of the receipt. Remember the power of the truth. Do not settle cheap. Fight the bastards. What is the most unbelievable piece of evidence you've ever used in a personal fight for justice? Drop your story in the comments below.